The conversation you are about to hear was recorded in 2020 during the height of the global pandemic. And now, Global Comedy Studios presents, Is This a Bad Time to Talk?
All right, I'm about to call my friend David Pasquesi, May 7th, 2020, around 11 a.m. Pasquesi is beloved by everybody as a phenomenal improviser, actor in person, and super cool. And I'm lucky to have him in my phone and be able to call him, so I'm about to... Hello?
Hello.
Dave Pasquesi?
Hey.
Hey, this is Ali. Is this a bad time to talk?
No, this is fine.
AKA, I'm here to listen.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a bad time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my call. Right now it's May 7th, 2020, 10 a.m. Chicago time, 11 o'clock New York time. If nothing else, you got the day and time out of this.
So, yeah, you people are already ahead. So stop put down the pens right now, those complaint letters.
I'm in New York City right now at an undisclosed location for both of our safety. But where am I finding you right now? You're
in Chicago, Illinois, but also an undisclosed location. Because I don't yet know where I live. We just moved.
Right. Oh my God, what is Chicago like right now? How is the pandemic?
I was actually out walking around at about 6 o'clock this morning. I walked over to the old place through the park, which was kind of open. They closed the parks, but I guess in the middle of the night they opened them a little bit. But anyway, there was some passages that were available at 6 o'clock this morning. It's a beautiful day. About a third of the people aren't wearing masks. Now that might be, I don't know, that might just be those early morning people thinking they're not going to run into humans, or I don't know.
Now, are you an early bird in general? Do you get up that early?
No, this is very strange for me.
Is it just stuff you're finishing up at the old house? Or?
Yeah.
And soon it will be. That was 25 years roughly you guys were there?
Yeah, right, exactly. A little more than that. Yeah, we were there for a long time. Wow. And now we're in we were in a full house where the boys were raised and stuff, and now we're in an apartment. It's got rid of most of our stuff. And
it must feel good.
It does, and it's weird too. It's kind of unmoored, you know.
Mm. And the boys are in Chicago too, you said?
Yes. Giancarlo lives here all the time, and Luca happens to be here when this whole thing started from San Francisco, and he's stayed with us. So he was here for the move and all that, and now he's with us in the apartment. Yeah, it's great.
I mean, that's nice to have the family together. It's one of those things with this pandemic is wherever you were is where you were when it went down.
Yeah, right.
And you kind of had to just, hold up where you were. And I was in New York, and so luckily I was here even though Chapel Hill continues.
Yeah.
That
would have been weird to be down there.
I wouldn't have stayed.
Right.
I would have come. I would have just been like, no, I'm renting a car. I'm taking a bus. I don't care. I wouldn't have stayed down there. It wouldn't have been feasible.
But you can fantasize about it, though, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. By myself, have an excuse to be down in Chapel Hill.
I can't come back.
My days are my own.
I can't come back.
I'm sorry.
They won't let me. I would.
What is this, teleschooling? What's this? I've heard about it. Oh, my God. You're doing dinner every night by yourself and cleaning up and working a full job? And they're both teleschooling? Oh, yeah. I'm in an office in a building that we decided to turn into a theater about 3 years ago.
Went for a real long walk today.
Yeah, just walking around Chapel Hill by myself, thinking.
But don't feel too bad for me.
No, I started a push-up thing.
Yeah, it's all crazy. And I don't mind, like we were talking about it before. I don't mind the weirdness. I just don't mind it. I really don't.
Yeah, yeah. There's a piece of me that, I toggle between. I'd be lying if I didn't say I was excited about this, and also horrified because every day, at the end of the day, I wear different hats. One is I oversee these bricks and mortar businesses, and it's a roller coaster of bills come right to my phone. So it's like Verizon, another $650 bill for this business that's been closed, but we're Verizon. We're not going to not charge you. And so you just got these repeating bills of here's $3,500 for your insurance carrier for your bar that's been closed for 7-8 weeks or whatever.
Right.
It's just those things are just gut punch, and then the landlords and the conversations with them, and them just not getting the memo that we're all in this together.
Yeah, I think that's maybe not entirely accurate. I don't think we are in this together.
Yeah, no one told my landlords because, they, and they're different in different relationships because, they're different people. But one, just wants it now, and just it's hard to even talk to him about why? How, can you explain to me your brainwashing? So I don't know. I mean, it's funny because, I was thinking, before I talk to someone on the phone, I've never looked them up before of any of the people I've talked to. And I talked to Dratch and Shannon and, Kevin McDonald and Reed Burney. And, I have to look them up just to be able to have some talking points. And you just see the body of work they have, and, all the things you've done. But, I got to Chicago November 1st, 1990 to take Michael McCarthy's sketch writing class at Second City.
Wow.
That's why I came, and I was like, that dude was the reason I moved to Chicago for his class because he'd written for SNL. But then with the Second City, a student, you get to see shows. So I remember being like, wow, this is great. And the first chance I got, I went to see the main stage show, Flag Smoking Permitted in Lobby Only.
Oh, wow.
And,
Okay.
and I was somewhere to the left area of where Ruby was there. I think
right towards the bench. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, towards the bench, but, looking up definitely. And the first scene was a blackout with you and O'Malley about two politicians running for office outdoing each other. So I can't exactly remember what the blackout was, but I remember the lights coming up and seeing you and this thing and being like, what is this? Because I'd never seen any kind of sketch comedy live like that. And then Farman was in that, right?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Also with O'Malley.
I loved Farman. And then the Mount Rushmore, the presidents, right?
Right. Four Stone Guys.
Four Stone Guys. God, I loved the harmony in Farman. But, yeah.
That was really fun. Gosh, yeah. That was a great time.
And, I had read, there was some GQ magazine article that summer before that had profiled that cast and had done makeovers for you guys, I guess. I don't know if you remember that, but I
do.
You. I saw you and Farley and Tim Meadows and O'Malley, and you had your hair and whatever done, and they had an article about Dell in this GQ, and I was coming to Chicago, and I'd heard about Dell, but then that was my first time seeing you, and then I guess I saw you throughout. My time in Chicago on stage, always admired you from afar, but it felt like Dell's Living Wake is when I felt like there was a little bit more of a, we connected on a level of that I was like, wow. But, this is for me more of a chance to, call friends and just kind of talk about the journey of, that was the first time I saw you, but up to that point, when did it start for you? And you grew up in Chicago area, right?
I did. I grew up in the Chicago area, and I'd always heard about Second City, but I never went. I'd never been to Second City until I was in college. And I had no interest in anything in the theater, didn't do, kids theater, didn't do anything in grade school or high school or anything. And then just going to college, got kicked out, fumbling around, got kicked out of some places, and then ended up kind of taking college seriously. I ended up at Loyola in Chicago, and my brother was in law school at the time, and I went with him he was taking a class in a player's workshop at the Second City in improvisation, just so he could be more comfortable doing his, they were doing, moot court and stuff like that. So he could be more comfortable in front of people, which was a common thing for people to do, that lawyers would do it, advertising people would do it to help them pitch to clients and things like that. And my mom kind of insisted. My brother said it would be fun. My mom kind of insisted that I go because I wasn't doing anything. And so I tagged along with my brother, and our teacher was Judy Morgan. And I really just loved it from the very beginning, improvisation. And I just loved it. And so I started reading about it and read this book, Jeff Sweet's book, Something Wonderful, right away. And I'm reading a bit about it and I'm reading this, like they talk about one of those casts at Second City, and it was one of those great casts. Not all of them are. This was one of them, and it was Joe Flaherty, John Belushi, Harold Ramis, Brian Doyle Murray, John Belushi, did I say? And Judy Morgan. I'm like, hey, that's my teacher's name. And then it was her. And she was just great. She was absolutely great. And because of her, I really, largely because of her, I really enjoyed it and kind of stuck with it. But then went back to college and never thought anything of it again. Then the next year, I ended up going to study in Italy. And on the plane on the way over there, I met Joel Murray, and we ended up being roommates over there. And we joked around. He had not done improvisation or comedy or anything like that either. And we kind of joked around about it. And I think the first time we did anything together was a talent show over there. We did something. And then when we got back, we ended up continuing stuff. And then one of his brothers contacted him and told him that this Del Close guy, who Joel already knew. Joel already knew Del and knew all about Del. I didn't. And he said that Del was starting to teach classes again. And so Joel wanted to go do that, and I just benefited from his advice, from the advice he got. And I went with him, and we stumbled into Del's class, and that was at the very beginning of him trying to figure out how to do the Herald for performance. And so I just lucked into that.
So the classes with Judy Morgan, that was at that time mostly games and exercises from Viola Spolin's book?
There were exercises from Viola, yes. It was, Joe Forsberg ran the school, who was part of Viola's lineage. But we were doing scenes too. It wasn't just it wasn't like theater games. We were doing scenes, and then the end of that, I think there were 5 sessions, and the 5th one was with Josephine. And what you did was created a sketch review that would be performed on stage at Second City on a Sunday afternoon, one time. And so we were doing sketch stuff. And then that was the first time I'd ever been on a stage, was Second City. Yes, it was really cool. And even then I knew, like, oh, this is really fucking cool.
In 5 weeks, you guys did games, exercises, scenes, and put up enough sketches to do a show.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, not 5 weeks. 5 sessions. And each session lasted about 4 or 5 weeks.
I see. Okay. Wow. So almost half a year to a year. Of half a year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, half a year. Exactly.
And when you got up there and you started doing your first scenes, was it just like, I remember having the feeling of getting up and doing those first scenes in Sharna's class and just being like, oh, this is where it's more comfortable than actually being in the real world, Was there just a sense of like, I don't know, like just a comfort immediately of being able to play make-believe with others on stage?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was, I'd never experienced anything like that before, and kind of like a duck to water, really enjoyed it from the very beginning.
And then when you met Joel on the plane, Joel was in the same program of people going to Italy to study?
Correct.
Wow. And then, from that, his brothers, obviously, Bill and Brian Doyle, had already achieved some level of success at that point.
Tremendous.
Oh, they already had.
Yeah, they already had. The Bill was already Bill Murray.
He was.
Yeah.
But he had not decided to get into that world yet as an improviser.
No, Joel. No. He was also just kind of going to school, I think. I was just talking to him yesterday. I should have asked him. And then we just kind of stumbled into that. He was going to Northern Illinois, and he kind of transferred into Loyola just to go to do that. And we ended up being there for a year, not just a semester. So we ended up spending a lot of time together. And we traveled a lot together and stuff.
I love that story you told me about having only enough money and you guys bought a loaf of bread and flowers. Remember that story?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I was really mad for a minute at Joel for doing that, but it was great. You can't have Christmas without flowers, he says.
It was Christmas time.
That's right.
It's like a Fellini film. And then, so Del's classes, had he started with Sharna yet, or he was just doing it on his own?
It was with Sharna. Yep. No, it was with Sharna. So it was already, before that, when I was just doing the stuff around Players Workshop, Del was at that time doing, occasionally he'd teach a class on a Saturday at Second City. Second City really didn't have any classes. They had no school of any kind. Don DePaulo would teach classes and Del would teach classes. And Don DePaulo much more regularly. Del was kind of also because he was incapable of doing anything, right? He was incapable of basically incapable of functioning. And I don't mean that pejoratively. It's just a statement of fact. And so him teaming up with Sharna made him accessible to the world, because if left to himself, he couldn't run a class. He couldn't do anything like that. So that was really fortunate for the rest of us that they ended up teaming up together, because she was able to do the things he couldn't.
And he, at that point, Joel had known about him because he had, trained Belushi and Bill.
And his brother.
And
Brian.
And Brian Doyle.
Yeah, both his brothers, right?
Right. And so he already had that kind of like, this guy has been around people who have already become somebody in the world of, improv comedy and sketch comedy.
Right.
And what were his classes like? Were they held at the School Street, or where did Sharna teach those first classes?
Yeah, not quite school, but what was it called? What was the name of that? Wilton. Yeah, at Cross Currents. Mm-hmm. It was on Cross Currents, or in Cross Currents, which was run by a guy named Tom Goodman, and he was an attorney. And I remember talking to him much later. He's like, "Yeah, I liked having the bar. I was not good at that, but I was also not a good attorney." He was a great guy. So he had the bar. It was a bar and a cabaret, and then upstairs there were rehearsal rooms, and that's where Mick first started with Mets Reform, was in one of the upstairs theaters, and that became Annoyance. And it was a big place. It was a big lot was going on, and the one main room was the big cabaret, and that's where the workshops were. They started upstairs until we were upstairs for a long time until it got good enough to try to start doing it on stage for people. So.
And you remember those early classes with Del and things he might have said, or the feeling of that time?
I do, but it's weird because I remember it, and then I hear other people talk about it, and we're not talking about the same thing. It's kind of wild how disparate it seems to be. Like I've walked into other guys that came up with me, and I walked into their classes when they're teaching, and I hear them say things like, well, as Del always said, and then they'd say something that I never heard Del say, and in fact, Del couldn't have said, according to me, right? It was like, that's completely antithetical to everything I believe Del to have said. And we were both in the same class, so they got that out of it, I got something else. But what I do remember is that he was really generous with any information he possibly could have for any of us. If you had any questions about improvisation, if you wanted to try to get better at any of that stuff, he was more than willing, just totally giving and generous with all his knowledge and experience. And also, he did not, he didn't suffer fools, and so there was, if you do things that if you were just blatantly being shitty in class, and he'd cut you a little slack, but if you continued to do that and disregard what he was asking you to do, he'd fucking light you up, and that was always unpleasant. So you didn't want that. You wanted to avoid that. And once in a while, he'd laugh, and that was also really great. So those were the motivators. One being, one to avoid and one to try to get. And so it was it's not like seeking approval or anything. I guess it's similar to that, but, we're all don't know what's going on. And I didn't know who he was, so I didn't know how scared I should be, so that was helpful. But, none of us knew what we were doing. No one had seen a Herald. So we didn't know what it's supposed to look like. And so it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. We looked forward to it. And, we'd teach his class on, and then once we started performing, Del would always teach class on Monday. And he did that because even if he was doing a play as an actor, he'd have Mondays free. So he'd teach class on Monday, and then we'd try what we were working on in class on stage after we would already started performing. And sometimes it would take till Wednesday to figure out what he was saying in class. I think he was really just smarter than anybody. And so it was hard to follow what was going on a lot of times. Because he's just really smart.
And, when you were there, that eventually, became that first group, Barron's Barracudas. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And, I guess that was the first time where people were putting structure to improv, where you had first, second, and third beats, and then, a group thing after the first round and a group thing after the second, and hopefully by the end of the third round, something culminated. That was kind of his architecture.
Yeah, but also we were always reminded that the Herald is not a structure only. It is, an exploration of these ideas. The structure is there, absolutely, but that is not what this is. exclusively.
And was the performances, they started being on weekends, or were they during the week?
I think they started on weekends, and then we moved to, I think it was Saturday nights, and then I think we moved to Wednesdays and Saturdays.
At Cross Currents. And who were some of the people back then that you were performing with where you were like, this is a good person and a good improviser?
So it was me and Joel. And actually, I was not on Barron's at the very beginning. There was another team that Sharna put together, and for some reason just wanted to separate Joel and I. I was on a team of mostly or exclusively stand-ups, because back then I used to do stand-up. But the only reason I did stand-up was to get more comfortable on stage so that I could be a better improviser. And so I was on stage. Joey Gutierrez was one of the guys, and Jeff Jenna. I don't remember who else was on that team. It didn't last long. And then some of the guys stopped doing it, and I ended up just going over to Barron's. And so it was just us at the beginning, which was Felsman and Barnes and JJ and Howard, and Joel and I, and Barnes, did I say? And Tara and Honor Finnegan. And then there was Becky Klaus too, who so that was our gang. And then other people started coming up. And so now Label's there, and Timmy, and Mitch Rouse, and Mick, and the next gang, and John Judd, and Bill Russell, and Brian Crane, and Judy Nielsen, and that was kind of the second Barons. And then the Finn, and Farley, and Holme, and Coleman, and Kefner, and Gardner, and Brian Stack, and all those guys start coming in. And then by that time I might not have even, I was just kind of teaching there, and I think I was probably already working at Second City by that time.
You were. So you were at that time, I mean, how long did the Barron's Barracuda and doing shows on Wednesdays and Saturdays, was that like 6 months, a year? And would Del come and see the shows? Was Sharna around all the time?
So at the beginning, Del would see, you'd always see the glow of his cigarette moving back and forth in the back of the dark theater, because he'd be pacing back there. No, he was at the shows. Del, at the beginning of every show, so the conceit was that this is a competition, right? That, the audience votes on who did the best Herald that night. And I think Del's idea was that in competition is where we see extraordinary behavior, not in pedestrian situations. So they have to be extraordinary situations to see extraordinary behavior. So this, mock competition was a way to maybe create a more heightened experience. I don't think that ever happened, but maybe. I think walking out in front of people does it. But so Del would open the shows by doing a little bit of stand-up or storytelling every show. And that was a hoot, and some of them were absolutely brilliant, and some of them were really touching, and like he went up the day his mother died and talked about it. It was great.
Wow. And then, from that, eventually some of you guys started getting hired by Second City. Who was on the main stage? Were you going to see shows at Second City at that point?
We were there. Yeah, absolutely. We were there every set. We were there almost every night watching the sets. So the first show I saw was with Joel after we came back from Rome, and it was Megan Fay and Kapelos and Jim Fay and Hags and maybe Lance Kinsey, I believe. And then soon thereafter, Richard Kind and Isabella Hoffman and Jim Fay and Hags and Dan Castellaneta. And that was pretty much the gang that I saw the most. And they were outstanding. And they were really great. And so at that time also, our gang from our group, Barons, Barracudas, mostly, although not entirely, there was a slight personnel change, and we went down the street to Gas Bars, which is now Shula's, and cleaned out the back room, which was just used for storage, and did shows in there under a different name called Harold Be Thy Name. And Jeff Michalski and Cheryl and Joyce came to watch us down there, and they hired everybody except me. They hired all the boys. And there was only a certain number of spaces. And I was, of course, just like a kick in the nuts. But that turned out to be a great thing for me because I spent, I got to spend another 6 or 8 months with Del. And it turned out to be great. And so then I just got hired the next time something became available in the touring company. And it worked out great. I would not have wanted that, but it turned out to be a great thing for me.
And at that time, who was in the touring company with you at that time?
So then the touring company I walked into was Barnes and Joel and JJ and Beltzman and Holly Wartell and I think Brenda Varda. But yeah, all that same gang from up the street.
Do you remember who the director was?
Yeah, first director was Michael Gelman. We also had Jeff Michalski sometimes.
It's interesting. I just talked to Richard Kind last week, and he was talking about, his time there and just that, he didn't feel like he went into there as a good improviser at Second City because he was coming from a different background. But then just those sets night after night after night, he learned on stage, and Kapelos, he said, was, somebody who taught him on stage, how to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was interesting. I was talking to Rachel yesterday, and she was talking about Del and how it's not that he was saying things, he said things here and there, it was nuggets of wisdom, but it was as much him being in the room that made you want to be better.
Yeah, right. You wanted to avoid getting your ass handed to you, too. I mean, there was some of that. It's not like, I really want to. Although getting a laugh from him was fucking outstanding.
Mm-hmm. And then how long did you guys tour? I mean, a touring company back then was 3 different touring companies?
Yeah, there was 2 and then a third, Patchco. It was basically red and blue, and then there was Patchco. And we were blue, I think. And I think I only toured for like 6 months. And then our touring company in its entirety, they put us out at Second City Northwest.
Huh.
They opened that up. Cheryl was the producer, and Fred Kaz stepped away from playing piano at main stage and came out and played and directed us out there.
Wow, because he wanted to be a director?
Mm-hmm. He wanted to try that.
Wow. Oh, that must have been something to have Fred Kaz,
I loved it. I think not everyone did. I was in heaven. We got along great, and I just think the world of him, and it was wonderful.
And the Northwest, that's like a 45-minute bus ride every day, roughly, or a van ride, rather, from Second City, North and Wells. So there's time to, get to know people a little better on that van ride. That was kind of the Northwest experience, right?
Yeah. And also we got to do our own material. So we opened up the place doing best of show, just like our touring company show. But while in pretty short order we got to, we were developing our own material. So we opened our own original review out there with Fred called Pieces of 88. And that's one of the only reasons that I know any of the years surrounding any of that time, because the year was in the title, Pieces of 88. It was 1988.
Okay. I thought it was because there's 88 keys in the piano, but all right.
Oh, nice.
Wow. Okay, so wait a minute. So Pieces of 88, but then at some point, Del came back to direct Second City, right?
So
the Gods Must Be Lazy.
Right. So at Second City, when people leave one at a time usually, and then a next person in line, or a next person in line in that particular archetype of that cast. Right. There were different kinds of performers within each cast, and there was, they just stumbled upon me. There's the egghead. There always were two women, generally the oddball and the more glamorous one. That was generally the women, and the guys were egghead, maybe an all-American guy, blue collar guy, and some possibly insane person. Generally, those were the archetypes of the performers. And so when someone would leave, the next person within that realm would take the job. And so Joel got the next job, got a job that was available on main stage. So he was already on main stage. And then a spot became available, another spot became available, and I went and filled that one. So it's Joel and I and some other folks that were part of the last show. And then we started to develop material for the next show, the next review, with Bernie, who was always the director down there. And during the process of coming up with the material, Bernie just said, you know what, I've had enough of this for the rest of my life. He stopped. He stopped. He goes, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this again. And so he stopped in mid-process, and Joel and I walked into Joyce's office and said, you need a director. You should have Del. And she liked the idea, or she made that happen. And so they got Del down there, and then some people didn't want to work with Del. Some people left, and I think part of the deal was Del wanted to have say over the cast, and so some of the people stayed, some of the people left, and then he brought in other folks to fill out that cast. And so it was Joe Liss, who was already down there with Joel and I, Joel and I, and Holly Wortell was already down there. And then he brought in Tim Meadows, Chris Farley, and Judith Scott.
And I know Del knew Farley from Improv Olympic, but was Tim Meadows was also at Improv Olympic at that point?
Yeah, that's how he knew him too. Yeah, so four of us were students of his for a long time. Joel and Tim, Chris and I. And Joe Liss he's just great. And we all got along, not for me, or Joel, or Timmy. Wow. I'm not sure about Holly. Joe for sure was in ETC. He was in there were some great shows back there, especially at that time and before. The original cast of ETC, they were outstanding. And also we were watching those shows too, coming up. That was Jeff and Jane and Bill Applebaum, Jeff Pinchowski, Jane Morris, Bill Applebaum. And Ruby Streak was playing back there. Carrie Goldenberg. That's great.
And did Joyce
Mark
and Bell
Belden.
have a Belden? Now, did Joyce and Bell have a relationship in terms of like they knew, not personal relationship, but they knew of each other in the comedy world, or she knew him? Were they friendly?
Oh, they worked together at Second City when Dell was the director there. Yeah. And I think Joyce came in. I don't know if Dell was still performing at Second City when Joyce arrived. I do not know that. But for sure, they had worked together for decades. And then there was a falling out. You know, they, as Bernie put it, we liked we liked his assets, and we did not care for his liabilities. And after a point, his liabilities outweighed his assets, meaning he was just fucked up all the time.
Wow. But they gave him, but
they
she
put
was
up
willing
with,
to do it.
They put up with it. Yeah. Oh, and okay. So that was years before. He had not been to Second City. I don't think he'd been associated with Second City for maybe 20 years. Is that? No, it couldn't have been 20 years. But it was a while, maybe 5 or 10 years, something like that. He had not set foot in the building, even though he lived across the street. There was a separation for sure. And he was, by the time, so part of what happened when Dell started teaching was he was able to teach because he was cleaned up. He wasn't fucked up all the time. And that was new. He stopped drinking, but he stopped doing all the other stuff too. He was smoking pot, and that was it. And that was part of the reason that he was useful. And he was so great to be, and he was on fire for trying to get this thing to work. I just lucked into that, just walked in at the right time. I know people that had Dell for a teacher, and they didn't get anything out of it. I don't know why. My guess is that Dell was not interested at the time, or didn't, it was in between being interested in things, and he's just kind of going through the motions. I don't know why, but I lucked out. The Dell that I got was fantastic. And he was a fucking asshole, too. In addition, let's not, forget that. He's a dick, or could be. He could be very giving and generous and genius, and he was a fucking asshole, too. Just out and out. It was
amazing. You and Joel going into Joyce's office, that corner office, and you basically threw the rope back down. I mean, to get your teacher to some degree hired as now your director. I mean, the chain of events.
Yeah, well, actually, she wasn't in the corner office at the time. Her office was right when you walked in past the box office and you take that first left.
Yeah.
Hers was straight ahead there.
Okay.
It was kind of that walk-through office.
Right, which became kind of like the, hangout room when I was there, where it was just a office, copy machine and whatever.
Yeah, that was Joyce's office. Because I think she always wanted to hear what was going on the phones.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to be close to that box office. She was great.
Now, The Gods Must Be Lazy, that was that summer of 90, or no, before that? Am I
don't know. It might have been 89. I think it was 89.
Okay, right. Because then Flag Smoking Permitted in the Lobby was 90. Farley was still there. Was Farley the first to go to SNL from the cast you were in?
Tim and Chris went together.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that I got my job on Main Stage was Myers. I took his spot. Mike Myers went.
Okay. Oh, Myers came down from Canada to do the Chicago show. To
do the Chicago show, and he also studied with Dell. He would come up and take class with Dell, even though he was working at Second City.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Did you end up taking any classes at Second City with, people like Marty DeMott?
Yes.
I mean, I know you studied with Martin.
Not Martin. No, I never really did. I maybe took one class with Donnie. So our group was the first, while those guys were on the road. While those guys were doing, while those guys were doing the touring company, I went and did the classes at Second City. Second City opened a school, and I ended up doing those classes. There were 5 sessions, just like Players Workshop, and the teachers I had were Jeff Wachowski and Sheldon Patinkin. I think that was it.
Mm-hmm. And did Bernie ever come back, or was Bernie literally done?
Nope. No, that was it.
That was it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Because I remember hearing some story about Dell coming into a class. I think this was way after you guys. He just came in and goes, I don't think I can do this anymore. And he left for a while. But I think that was after he directed shows in Second City and was primarily just at I.O. But that cast right there, Tim Meadows, you, Farley, I saw Odenkirk and Jill Talley. They were in a picture I saw with you and Tim Meadows. Was that one of the City?
Yep, that was the show after Flag Smoking. It was, I don't remember the name of it.
Right.
But, it was the one that Tom Giannis directed.
Okay, right.
And it was right. Jill. It was Jill and Bob Odenkirk. And that was the one, Van Down by the River was from that.
Right.
And Odenkirk wrote that. Van Down by the River was definitely obscene.
And Odenkirk wrote that for Farley,
Correct.
But they were both in the same cast. He just somehow thought Farley was going to be better at doing it than he was.
Yeah, and also he was already a writer on SNL.
Odenkirk was.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And I remember he came in with a scene that he was playing something, and we tried it, and then we switched, he and I. We just switched parts, and it was a hoot. Ended up making it into the show.
I mean, playing with someone like Farley, obviously, so much has been said, but, is he someone who you were like on stage with, and, was there a sense of like, this guy he wants to make people laugh a lot?
Yeah, well, not just that, but yes, he wants to make them laugh, but Jesus Christ, they love him. It was wild. They just like, they just absolutely loved him.
The audience.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I remember seeing the scene Rooftop, and that was a scene that, to me, it seemed like it was the beginning of like, not everything's got to be funny. Some things can be just good acting and have laughs and a good scene that looked like it was almost out of a play. I remember love seeing Rooftop, talking about the lights in Chicago.
Right. Yeah, that was a fun scene, and that was one of those that was, I remember, here's how I remember it. We were doing a set, and someone, we used to take suggestions for locations and, social concerns and things like that. And somebody said Rooftop, and we're putting the set together in between, and Tim Meadows just goes, hey guys, let's do that Rooftop scene. As though, and he said it in a way like, the one that we do, that one that we always do, but we've never done one. We've never done any kind of scene that was ever on a rooftop. But he just goes, let's do that Rooftop scene. And so we're just like, oh yeah, okay. And so we all, and the scene that made it to the show was exactly the same scene that was improvised that first night. except for I think there was one or two lines that were removed from it, but absolutely no other changes.
Wow. I mean, a scene like that, I mean, you could walk into, a show at Second City, and you just walked into the very beginning of Rooftop and left right after Rooftop was ending. You might think you're seeing a play, in another theater in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Did that in some way plant seeds for you of like, I want to start doing more acting? Or were you always, because what Joyce used to always say is, to be a good improviser, you need to be a good actor, but to be a good actor, you don't have to be a good improviser. Something along those lines.
I suppose my belief is both really help each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I never was an actor. I never was in a play. Never had. I just ended up auditioning. Once I started working at Second City, I'd audition once in a while for stuff, and the first play I ever got was after I was already on main stage. They let me go do a play that I got.
Wow. Had you taken any acting classes, like, center theater, that type of thing?
No.
Wow.
I ended up in an acting class once, and I looked around, and at that time, there was a guy named Willie Galt who was a wide receiver on the Bears, and he was in the acting class I was in, and I was thinking, one of us is in the wrong class. And so I didn't go back.
So then, Flag Smoking was the last show you did? No, you did one more show after Flag Smoking, right?
Correct. The one with, Bob and Jill.
And I remember, seeing this thing, I think it was something on Joyce's wall where Belushi had said, you spend so much time getting hired by Second City and getting in, and then it's a place that you get lulled into staying, and you figure out at one point you're like, how am I ever going to get out of this place? Because it's a sweet gig. I mean, as far as a comedic actor gig goes, maybe nationally, but definitely in Chicago, where you could be 6 nights a week.
It's the only one. It was the only paying job for people with our background. That's it. There were no other options, unless you want to go out and start your own comedy group and with that hustle. But that was the only regular, paying gig as an employee, just a hired gun.
Was it hard to leave?
No. It's when you first. My experience was I get the job and I'm like, holy shit. And they're going to pay me too, because you'd have done it for free. And then after a certain amount of time, and I think it's different for everybody, one day arrives like, there is not enough money in the world to get me to do this one more night. And the job didn't change. The job stayed exactly the same. But one changes, hopefully.
Right.
But yeah, there's no experience like it. There's no teacher like that experience with 1,000 shows.
And so what happened after you leave Second City? Where are the next, bifurcation points for you in Chicago?
For me, I did plays. I didn't do much. I guess I spent more time going out to Los Angeles. I was doing voiceover in Chicago, so that kept me in Chicago. But I was going out to Los Angeles and trying to get TV jobs and stuff like that. But living in Chicago.
I remember seeing a playbill, and you're holding Giancarlo as a baby.
Uh-huh.
You remember that?
Sure. It was taken by Jennifer Gerard.
Right. But that was for a Second City. It was in a Second City playbill.
I believe so.
Yeah. And then at some point, you become friends with Jeff Garlin, and you were in his movie, I Want Somebody to Eat Cheese With, and you call your character Luca Giancarlo after the Suns.
Right. Actually, yeah, he named it that, which was
he did. Oh wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Richard Kind was telling me that when he met Garland was just working in the box office selling T-shirts to begin with. Was he someone who was in your casts and someone you improvised with, or you just became friends via the Second City family?
We were friends before. We were friends through stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
It just being in Chicago comedy scene. But we were friends before Second City. And we were hanging out a lot back then. And then, he was working the box office, and then he, I think he was in the touring company. I would think I might have already been gone, or maybe I was on main stage or something, but he started at Second City a little later than I did.
And then I remember at some point, maybe you weren't doing that much improv type stuff, and then you and Del decided to do a two-person show. I remember seeing
that was during that first play I did was Chicago Conspiracy Trial Over It Remains,
right.
And Del played David Dellinger and I played Abby Hoffman. So we performed together. So we're spending a lot of time together, and during that time is when we came up with the idea to do that two-person show, which we performed at the old Remains Theater.
Right. I mean, that must have been something to have the journey of, going from, Joel telling you about Del Close and then studying with Del and being directed by him and then being on stage with him as a fellow improviser and peer. That must have been.
It was really great. Right. First of all, as fellow actors, which was really a hoot. And then,
right.
Then we came up with that show together. And then eventually he used to shoot these things for My Talk Show, I think it was called, these little remotes where he played a character that would pirate into the broadcast of that show. And he would always run that stuff past me, which was really an honor as well. And I'd be there for the shoots. I wouldn't say I was directing, but just there as another eye.
I remember seeing one of those, the one about the guy who's falling out of a plane and he decides to do flips, and the one. Yep. I loved that one. That was one of those, right?
Yep, that was one of those.
Right. I love that. The guy jumps out of a plane, his parachute doesn't work, and he has to make a decision of, am I going to just fall to the earth screaming and flailing in fear, or am I going to start, using this moment to start doing flips and, twirls and turns?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tried. He could not. His chute would not open, and rather than just panic and freak out, he just started doing all the things he couldn't do.
Now, at that time, too, the Steppenwolf is doing its thing, and the Remains has got its thing. I mean, the theater scene in Chicago is becoming like, a legitimate, great regional theater scene. Are there, had he done Shakespeare? No, wait a minute. At the Le Panagile yet? Had he started doing that?
The Panagile was over at the Steppenwolf. That was later, I think. That was Steppenwolf upstairs. I think that was a little later. He was always doing Shakespeare. He was always doing show. Oh, he did fucking Hamlet at Wisdom Bridge, which was fucking fantastic.
Right.
And they did it at the Wisdom Bridge, and then they remounted it at the Lyric. I remember seeing it in both places. That was one of the best plays I ever saw. Of any kind, not just Shakespeare. That was just one of the best plays I ever saw. There was just 2 Wisdom Bridge shows that were some of the best plays I've ever seen. Hamlet, Bob Falls, and Belly of the Beast, Billy Peterson. I forget who directed that one, but they were both at God damn it, Wisdom Bridge, I think. Mm-hmm.
And then, I guess, like for me, I go back over the landscape of time and the times our paths crossed where, I say hello, we have a conversation. But then there was that living wake for Del in the hospital, which just seemed like a very, it was that March 99. And I guess we knew it was coming, but didn't know it was going to be tomorrow. and all these people came to say goodbye to him.
Right.
Yeah,
it was pretty great. I remember walking in that hospital to find out where we were going. And I'm like, I'm not sure. I went by myself, and I'm not sure what room I'm supposed to go in. And then I overhear some freaks in front of me, and they're witches. And I'm like, I'll just follow them.
That's right. That's right. The witches and warlocks and pagans come to. I remember he wanted a chocolate martini, he said, and he wanted to, sit and receive people, and you got a chance to go up and say your goodbyes to him. And but I mean, Bill Murray showed up. Harold Ramis was there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that point, like you always knew who Del was, and you'd always heard about.
And Brian was there too.
Right. Brian.
Mm-hmm.
But that afternoon, because I had a show that night at ETC, but I wanted to go by and say goodbye, and then I had to run to go to the 8:00 call time. I think it was a Thursday night, and I was just at that point. It all kind of it's like, oh yeah, he was who he was, and it all kind of, I don't know. We always got along very well. I mean, exact same kind of thing. If he liked you, he liked you. If he saw that you were trying and putting your heart out there and not trying to be funny, he was, an advocate for you. But he did not bear fools gladly. But I never saw anything but his generosity and kind side. He never said a harsh word to me. We always got along well. We had nice conversations. He encouraged me to, keep doing whatever I was doing, and he was also
Go ahead.
He was also okay with talking about Farley and other people who he taught. Like it wasn't like he was ever over it when you were young and you had the naivete of like, so Chris Farley, and he's like, oh yeah, Farley came and we knew the talent he had. We wanted to be able to. We thought we could get him to Saturday Night Live within 2 or 3 years. So it's like he didn't mind like having those conversations you have over and over again.
Yeah. I don't know, because I know that he used to think that he used to view those people and us as his version of children.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I know that not because I'm surmising it. He said those words. Mm-hmm. Like, and so sure, he'd be happy to talk about his kids.
Right.
And there was still, what's the wild thing is there was still insecurity, and there's still, envy regarding fame and stuff like that. It was, it's wild to see it was great. It was great. And then also all the people that would come through and visit him. And Label used to live around the corner. We all, from Del and from me, and we all used to spend a lot of time together. And we used to spend a lot of time. It was like I couldn't get high and go talk to Del though, because I just could not keep up. I just like, fuck, as soon as I smoked anything, I'm lost. I can't handicap myself in any way and hope to understand what this guy's talking about, ever.
Yeah, you had to have your wits about you.
Yeah, right.
He had a deep wealth of knowledge, and he was such a voracious reader, and he would pull up references and reading stuff where it's just like, oh, all right. And you knew it was important, but you didn't maybe know exactly what he was talking about.
Right. And he'd taught, we'd spend a half hour of class talking about, how Hector and Achilles, right?
Right.
And then, all right, get up, 2 people on stage.
Right. He would do these, we'd call them Delalogues, because he would talk for 30 to 45 minutes, and then, at his own, all right, time to do a scene. But
I guess what I learned most was from him and from that time that has stuck with me is we're not necessarily doing comedy. This doesn't have to be funny. That's not the job. And to be genuine is the if you're looking for a response, being genuine is going to get that response, the best one. And if you happen to be funny and genuine, that's great. But if you kind and genuine also is fine. But just not to go for laughs and not to sell out anyone.
And so, you did your, after that 99 coming into the early 2000s, you end up doing a solo show, right? Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah. Kill the messenger. Yep.
Kill the messenger, right.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing that at ETC. And so,
right.
I guess at that point you're in a place too where I live in Chicago, I'm doing voiceovers, I'm raising a family, I've got to somehow start finding ways for myself to fulfill myself as an artist.
This is what happened. One day somebody said, "Well, what do you?" He said, "Oh, you're an actor. What do you do?" And I'm like, and I said, which was an answer that I always used to say, which I used to work at Second City. And then I heard myself say it, and then I realized that's about 10 years since I've worked at Second City. So I need to be able to say something else. I need to get to work. And so that's one of the things that prompted me to do that one-man show.
And then from there, I remember, you ended up being in Glen Ross at Steppenwolf and playing Roma. And,
yep.
That has its own, connection with me because I auditioned for that role on 9/11 in New York City. And so that audition for that role always has like a place in my 9/11 story. But then I got a chance to come and see you and Tracy in it on the Steppenwolf main stage. I mean, was that one of the first big theater shows you'd done, or had you done smaller theater before that?
I had done a show at the Goodman with Amy Morton, who directed Glengarry, and it was during that. But that was in the studio, and at the same time, Del was on the main stage at the Goodman, and that's when we kind of rekindled a relationship that we had parted ways a couple of years before that because he was a dick, and so we saw each other there. So I did that play, and then I was doing another play upstairs at Victory Gardens for Dennis. It was not for Dennis. It was Susan Nussbaum was directing a play called Henry Flamethrower, and I happened to be in the production of that when I got the Glengarry job, so I had to leave the other one. And Dennis Zajac, like, oh yeah, you got to go take that job. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable, just like Chicago is. Oh, you have to. I went, it was great. They're wonderful, wonderful folks. And so I got to do that. I'd never worked there before, and I got to work with that. That cast was unbelievable. I had worked with Matt DeCaro before. I did a Mammoth play with him up at Northlight. We did the old neighborhood together. So I had worked with Matt DeCaro, and I had worked with Amy, but I didn't know Tracy. That's when I met Tracy. And Pete Burns was in the show as Link, and so of course I knew Pete. He was also a Second City guy. And Mike Nussbaum, who directed me in that Mammoth play at Northlight. So I'd worked with him before and worked with his. So Al Wilder I didn't know. But that was great. That was a wonderful, wonderful cast.
And I mean, I would assume, doing a play like that at the Steppenwolf, Mammoth, Glengarry, Glen Ross, all of a sudden potentially opens up other acting opportunities in Chicago for you?
I always think that when I get a nice job and do a good job at it, I think it's going to open up a lot of other opportunities. That's never happened to me as far as I know. As my mom used to say, when I say, hey, I got this job, she goes, oh, maybe that'll lead to something. all so each job is just this job. It is for this job.
Right.
But that was great. So I did do another show at Steppenwolf with Tracy. We did this 3-hander, and it was a really good time. The Dazzle, Richard Greenberg play.
Right.
That David Cromer directed with Susan Bennett and Tracy and I. We had a great time.
Wow. Now, because, you didn't take acting classes, and you're kind of a Ronin in that way because you're, your own masterless warrior. How did you find like a process for acting in terms of the script, learning lines, approaching the work? Where did you just, formulate your own system?
Well, a lot of that, the learning lines and stuff was from Second City. Being in the touring company, you'd get a scene. Like, I got thrown in because a guy got injured, and I had to learn all his parts in like 2 days. And oftentimes you'd have to learn a scene in a very short amount of time. So I started to learn lines that way, and my trick for that is I don't learn the lines, but just learn the scene. And then that works in large part, but then you have to get word perfect after that. But I find that helpful. And then just doing the plays. I didn't know that I had to get every word exactly right until we were in previews for Chicago Conspiracy Trial, and the stage manager, Puff, hands me a stack of those lines that say, you said this, you were supposed to say this, the little line notes. You said this, you paraphrase that, you transpose these lines. And so she hands me a stack of them, and I go, what are these? And she explains what they are. And I said, wow, I was pretty close. And she takes her cigarette out of her mouth, and she goes, this ain't about close, Pasquesi. Learn the fucking lines. So that was my lesson, and that was one of the best theater lessons I ever had. All right, learn word perfect. That's the job. Getting close is not the job.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah.
And I also just from doing plays is my only. Just like from doing the show at Second City is the best teacher. I think doing plays is the best teacher. And also, I got to work with really great people.
And when you're working with a cast like, the cast you mentioned at Steppenwolf for Glengarry, obviously, Roma is an iconic role, but you're surrounded by great actors. Are there moments where you're on stage with them or other people where you thought, wow, they're good at what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I get it improvising too. Like, oh, fuck. And my reaction is, after being impressed, is, holy shit, I better step up or I'm going to get left in the dust.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be real obvious I'm not as good as them. So, and recently it happened on Lodge 49. I'm like looking around like, oh man, I gotta work. I better show up fucking ready to go. Because that was a great cast.
And are there people you remember without, worrying about leaving people out that you can think of just off the top of your head who you're like, wow, yeah, they're good, whether it's actors or improvisers?
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't really want to start mentioning people because I'll forget.
Right.
But there are people who I've like of late, Mike Shannon, Tracy, TJ, Joel. I love working with Mitch as improvisers, and then acting. Yeah, a lot of those same people. I have to try to keep up.
Right. How does something like, you mentioned those folks, like the show you did, The Factory, something like that, or, Merkin Penal, how do they come about?
Mm-hmm.
For people who maybe
Factory,
listening being like, how do I do this?
Okay, The Factory was a show that we did on Spike, and that was all Mitch. that was created by Mitch, and then we ended up coming in and helping out, and I ended up writing on it too. After the first one, Mitch and Ken Lipman and I wrote them, but that was all Mitch. Mitch, we shot it. Like, he came up with the idea, we shot it. He pitched it around. We reshot it. He pitched it again. And then it got bought over at Spike as their first comedy. I think Spike is no more. But it was like it's part of Viacom. It was kind of a Comedy Central offshoot-ish. But then we ended up shooting those, and we bring in most of it. So it was the main four were Mitch and me and Mike Coleman and Jay Leggett. We were the four main cast, along with Renee Albert, and it was really a great time. And then we'd call in our buddies and for improvisers, and also if we called in people who didn't feel comfortable improvising, we'd write scenes for them. And so whatever their strengths are, or, we just want to make everybody feel comfortable. And it was really a blast. And then we improvised it quite a bit within it. But you can't improvise a TV show because you need locations and stuff, and you can't fully improvise. But within this framework of what we were already going to shoot, we would improvise different stuff, and things. We ended up figuring out how to do it so that we could make adjustments to what we discovered by doing this big walk and talk of the main cast at the end, and we could explain things away if we needed to. But it was really fun. And then Mercantina was almost the exact same thing. Mitch and I came up with it. That was my own money, and went and rented a prison and got all our buddies together and went and shot something in a prison. And we're, still trying to sell that.
Wow. Now, I know you were, loved and respected by, Amy Sedaris, Paul Dinello, Stephen Colbert, Carell. It's because they saw you on main stage when they were like in touring company, and then that's how something like, Strangers with Candy and Highway 57 comes about?
I think so. Exit 57. Yeah, I think so. We ended up working a little bit together in Chicago. I worked on something with Mitch and Paul for Bernie after Second City. And so that was the first time we actually worked together. But I think we shot stuff. With each other back when they were still in Chicago. And then they moved to New York and did Stitches, a stage show, and then got Exit 57 from that, and they brought me out to write on that.
The writing process, it seems like you also have done, a lot of writing as well. Is that something that you just you sit down and do it? Is there a process to it, or?
Yeah, it's usually with someone, and it's just fun. And anymore, it's just a reason to hang out with people I enjoy with deadlines. And a lot of it was just because I want to be working more than I am, and they weren't hiring me, so I made my own stuff. And that's really the impetus for most of it. Like, I want to be doing more than I'm doing, and I'm not big on waiting around for the phone to ring.
So something like TJ and Dave, which has kind of become, its own kind of iconic thing in the journey, from IO basement to Broadway, really. How does something like that come about, and, the early genesis of it? And then, I remember coming to see you guys in that, the former Swedish American Men's Club where you began down below. How does that, how does that come about? How does it become the journey that it became,
Well, so we did a Chicago Improv Festival one year. The people that were supposed to do the show, they were, it was like headliners. They couldn't make it, so they needed to throw a team, throw a group together to fill that slot. And it was whoever was in town, and it was me and TJ and Noah, and I think Horatio was there, and Kevin Dorff happened to be there, and Adsit, and Jimmy Corraine. I think that was the group. Did I say Nick? I think Nick too. So that was the group. And so we just did a show. That was the first time I worked with TJ. And we had the main thing is we had a lovely conversation in the wings before the show that night. And then after that, I think it was Noah that said you guys should do a show or something like that. And then, so we decided to do a show. We didn't know what it was going to be. And I remember we met at this coffee shop, and TJ was wondering if we should get other people. And my suggestion was, let's wait, because it's so much easier. And I think this is good advice for anybody. It's so much easier to invite people into a project than to uninvite them. So we were just like, well, as we need people, we'll add them. And then we did the first show at that coveted 11 p.m. Wednesday slot. And China would have given us any time. We wanted that one. And the first show was not like the format that we're doing now. It was these 3 distinct separate scenes, none of them any good. And then we met up again and like, well, we don't want to do that again. And so then we started, the idea was, well, let's just try to see if this thing that we say we believe in works. And that is, behave honestly in this moment, given everything that we know up until this point. And not worry about anything else. Just behave honestly, respond honestly in this moment, given everything else we've established up until this point. And then this next moment, respond honestly to this moment. And that's it. It's these little tiny steps with no grand plan. And that's what we started to do. And that's what this... Go ahead.
But at what point did you guys decide we're not taking a suggestion? Trust us. This is
that was the very beginning. That was from the very beginning. And that was just because and also one of the reasons for doing the show is I did not see the kind of improvisation that I was taught. I did not see that represented on the stages in Chicago. It had become real funny and not all that grounded. And so that was not what I came up learning. And so that was also just here's another way to improvise. It's not like that one's bad. This is another way. And so that was that.
And then, Alex Karpovsky, who people know him from Girls, decides to make an independent film with you guys. How did you guys cross paths with him?
So we started coming to New York City at the Barrow Street because of Scott Morphy, who came to Chicago, and Tracy Letts brought him to our show. And he saw our show because he had produced Killer Joe in New York. So that's how Tracy knew Scott, and Tracy knew us, and he would often do TJ and Dave. And so he brought Scott to see us, and Scott thought he could maybe bring us to his theater and expose us to a different audience, a theater audience rather than a comedy audience or an improv audience. And I was real interested in trying that, so we started going to New York, and they were great to us. We were not selling at all for the first. We were there every weekend. I mean, a weekend a month for 4 nights, and we were getting like 20 people in the house and things like that. And so they stuck with us for a long time. And then so one of these trips, Alex Karpovsky was dragged to our show and did not like improvisation and did not want to go, but his friend dragged him. And he went, and then he saw it, and he came back the next night to see if it was improvised, I think. Like, what are they doing? And that's one of the things about it is if you don't know it or trust it, you should see it a couple times. So he came back the second night, and then after the second night, he approached us and asked if we could make ask if he could shoot it, a documentary about it. And we had already tried to shoot our show. Paul Gilmartin, do you know who he is? He liked it. He was a fan of our show, and he brought in cameras and like a crew and stuff, and he shot one of our shows, and it just doesn't look good. And I think Alex Karpovsky did a great job at shooting improvisation. He brought in 8 cameras and shot it like a sporting event. And he was up in the bathroom upstairs at the Barrow Street telling, like, go 1, 2 widen out, like shooting it like a sporting event. And so I think that's a great contribution to improvisation is the way Alex shot it. Because it's unwatchable in the standard flat 4 camera. It's just unwatchable. Any improvisation, no matter how good it is just unwatchable. So I thought he did a great job doing that.
It's the poster of it hangs in the pit, and I upstairs right before the attic space when you go up. So I'm always, I don't know what's going to happen to the spaces, but I'll make sure to take the poster with us wherever we end up. Something like Angels and Demons, a great film, a phenomenal role for you in it. How does something like that come about? Out of Chicago or Los Angeles?
Out of Chicago, on tape, in my little apartment. I taped by myself in that little apartment. I was represented at that time by Paula Music and Suzanne DeWalt were my managers. I sent the tape, and Suzanne says, change it and do this instead. And I was reluctant to do that, and she was absolutely right. And so I went out there, and then so I got the job, and I showed up the table.
Another audition or no? You got the role just from the tape.
From the tape, I was brought out to the table read where they could have fired me. I wasn't guaranteed to have the job, but there were no more auditions. And I went out to the table read, and Ron Howard was shocked to find out I wasn't Italian because I did the entire audition with an Italian accent.
Wow.
And he almost didn't hire me because of it, because he wanted an Italian.
Interesting. And then something like Veep, how does that come about? Out of Chicago or Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, that is Allison Jones, the casting director, who is always really good to Chicago people because she understands our sensibility, and I think she's just great. So she cast the pilot, and I started auditioning for it from the pilot. And then I auditioned, I think, 5 different times for 5 different parts throughout the first year. And then I ended up getting the one I got.
I mean, that must be nice to be able to go out there to do a project like that, for the period of time that was on.
It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That was fantastic. And what a gang that is. Again, so much connection to Chicago. Gary Cole, Kevin Dunn. Gary Cole was Remains Theater. Kevin Dunn lived above the Old Comedy Showcase, where I used to do stand-up. I'd not known either. I'd met Gary before, but I'd never really spent time or worked with him. It was just fantastic. And Julia, of course, from Northwestern, and Anna from Northwestern. Matt Walsh from Dell. Tim Simons. I mean, almost everybody except for Reed and Tony were through Chicago.
And Julia had been in that original, the ETC space. They opened that up, right?
They are the ones who turned it into the theater that we see there. Yeah, that was the Practical Theater Company.
That's right.
And as soon as they opened their show, they all got hired by Saturday Night Live. And so that's why it was available for Jeff Michalski and Jane and Jim Fay and Matt Applebaum and that first gang to do it as the ETC.
I talked to Michael
Mindy
Shannon.
Bell was part of that too.
That's right. I was talking to Michael Shannon last week, and he was talking about, and Richard Kind had mentioned about Michael Shannon. He said, and obviously both big fans of yours, that we all knew Michael Shannon was a great actor, but we didn't know he was a great improviser as well. And he said he was excited to be able to maybe hopefully do another show with you back at the Pit. And I have doesn't worry about
the best time.
Yeah.
I have the best time with him.
Yeah.
It's just great. And also, I got to work with Richard for an extended period. We did a Second City show in Atlantic City, and I got to work with, it was Joel and I and Richard and Mike Haggerty and Ruthie Rudnick and Sue Bugg. And I was just thrilled to be able to work with, those were the guys I came up watching, Hags and Richard. So that was just such a hoot.
That's why, because he also said he like him and Jeff Garland. Jeff Garland's one of his best friends, and I know you and Jeff Garland are close. But it's all these little connections as I speak to people, and I'm just basically going through my phone and texting people and seeing who will talk to me. But when I talked to Shannon, I said, does it ever worry you being up there? He goes, well, when you're up there with Dave, you're kind of taken care of. It'll be okay. But, it's exciting to think hopefully someday, there'll be a space in New York for the two of you. Again, I don't know what the future holds because landlords are on a different page. It's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, read a paper. Read a paper, fellas.
Yeah. I mean, UCB's already had to pack it up and say we can't do it in New York. It's just not worth it financially. And, people ask me what I thought, and I said, I take no joy in it. It's another theater that's not around, and, you got to be humble because I'm going through the same thing.
Right. And also, because of them, you.
Yes, absolutely, no doubt.
Right.
I was a founding member. Yeah, I was a founding member. Those were my friends. I moved to, yes, I moved to New York City for Saturday Night Live. Yes, but without UCB, I wouldn't have started teaching my writing for SNL class. I wouldn't have been doing ASCAP, twice on Sundays. So when people were trying to get some rise out of me, I'm like, no, absolutely not. This is not good. It's not good for me. It's not good for anybody. I'm not in competition with another comedy theater. I'm in competition with TV phones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, right now, we're all kind of in a wait and see what happens. But and obviously, you're somebody who everybody respects you, everybody likes you, everybody thinks you're cool too. That's the other thing.
We are not. You are. You should come to my house if you think that.
Well, no, I have kids too. I get it. But what is in an ideal world when this is done? What kind of and it seems like you've been creating your own worlds in a way for a long while now. What is that world you'd like to create for yourself on the other side of this when it opens up?
Well, I really enjoy improvising. I would love to do that more. I'd like to be in the cities where that's possible to do frequently, consistently with different folks. But it's hard, because I love improvising with Mike Shannon. He's really busy. I like improvising with Tracy. He's really busy. I like improvising with TJ. He's not as interested in it. I like improvising with Joel. He lives in Los Angeles. I like improvising with Timmy Meadows. He lives in Los Angeles, and he's really busy. So I'd love to be able to do that more. That's for sure. And I'd also like to sell one of these other things that we get to work with our friends more regularly. I love working on Amy's show. That is absolutely perfect. It's so much fun. It's insane, and they're just wonderful people. It's such a treat. I'd like to be able to do something like that and participate more in something like that.
Now, for someone like me, I mean, I love Chicago, and any chance to come back, I will take in a heartbeat. Do you want it, this idea of what you're talking about, to be in Chicago, or do you not mind traveling to New York and Los Angeles when need be? Obviously, your sons are grown up now.
Yeah, I'm fine traveling. I just know this town better, and I know people here more. But and I like living here, but it's not essential that I stay here.
Would you ever think about directing the show at Second City? I know you and TJ did some teaching together and you solo. Do you still enjoy teaching?
Some. I don't mind doing like a workshop. I did a class when we had our theater for a while, and I did a class for a few weeks or 6 weeks or something. And I don't think I'm a good teacher. That's all. I just don't think I'm a good teacher.
What about
I don't
a director?
have the patience. We directed. TJ and I directed 2 reviews at the Mission when we had it, which was fantastic. The cast was unbelievable. The material I thought was outstanding, and we just couldn't get people in the seats. But those casts and that material I'll put up there with as good as I've seen. But we couldn't get people in the seats. It's a lot of work to direct. It's a lot of work. And I used to think I was a director. I was for a while I was helping out with plays, going in and kind of directing plays, and then I did the Dazzle that Cromer directed. And I'm like, oh, that's a director. I can talk to actors. That's not the only job. I'm pretty good at talking to actors. I don't think I'm ready or qualified to be an actual director.
Well, wow. It's like I said, I count myself profoundly lucky to be able to text you and see if you want to talk for a little bit. Obviously
you're the best, Ali.
I thank you. I thank you for saying it. But I mean, it's interesting the thing you said about Del, where we were like his children, because when we moved here from Iran in summer of '69, it's my father, my mother, me. My sister showed up 3.5 years later, but there was no more family. That was it. We were saying goodbye to uncles and aunts and cousins. So throughout my life, I found that I've been drawn to, like, this would have been my uncle. This might have been my grandfather. This would have been my brother, this would have been my cousin. And so it's like, and also that connection of when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, we would have been friends in 7th grade riding our bikes around all summer. You kind of leapfrog the perfunctory kind of getting to know people. And so I just feel very lucky to, be able to have a conversation with you like this. And I think this was born out of the pandemic, because I don't know if I would have been willing to. I would have been loath to bother someone like you for this amount of time to talk on the phone. I would have been like, or I would have let perfect get in the way of good, of like, let's meet at Simple Studios when you're in town, and we'll get the equipment set up, and I'll get you guys something to eat. It would have just, it would have lingered. And I don't even know if this is recording, because it's really a phone call. I hope it is, and I got to figure out how to post it. But, I hope you know how much you're, loved and respected by everybody who does this, and, what you've done for improvisation, both in Chicago, nationally, and globally, So I thank you for your time, David Pasquesi.
Thank you. Thanks for everything, Ali. You know that there's something I'm working on. I've told you about it, where you're in it. Can't wait. Can't wait.
It would be my honor to share screen or stage with you at any time.
Great.
Best to your family, David.
Thank you. You too, Ali. Thanks very much. I love you.
Thank you. Stay healthy. I love you as well.
Bye.
Wow. David Pasquesi. I mean, like I said, I got to Chicago November 1st, 1990, went to my first Second City main stage show, flag smoking permitted in lobby only, and there he was on stage. And, if you haven't heard those pieces from Second City, Farman is just a phenomenal song in and of itself, and Ruby Streak, the music, the harmony, the Four Presidents, Four Stoned Guys, hilarious. it goes on and on what he's done for improvisation, what he's meant to so many people, and how respected he is. I mean, he's just respected by the people that everybody else respects. You know, Stephen Colbert, Carell, Paul Dinello, Amy Sedaris, Jackie Hoffman, you know, all those people saw him on stage when they were younger at, you know, Second City and at Northwest or in ETC or in the touring companies. And, you know, we just hit it off, I guess, you know. There was some connection in a shared kind of, you know, madness that we'd both been through in our lives, or breakdowns of some sorts, or, you know, whatever it may have been. But I thank you for listening thus far. If you're still listening, if you are, please check out thepit-nyc.com for classes online and in the real world. And I hope to see you someday in the real world. And if you ever get a chance to see Dave Pasquesi improvise with anybody, make arrangements to do so. So wherever this finds you, good night, or sweet dreams, or good morning, or good afternoon. But until we meet again, I hope you are healthy. If you're not healthy, I hope you get healthy. Once you get healthy, I hope you stay healthy and appreciate your health. So long for now, and I hope to see you in the real world. Safe travels and happy trails.
Thanks for listening to Global Comedy Studios. Is this a bad time to talk? Stay tuned for more.